When did video games become so violent and scary?
The top 3 best-selling video games of 2017 were Call of Duty World War II, NBA 2K18, and Destiny 2. 2 out of 3 are violent first-person shooter games.
Violent media is extremely popular in the US today, across both video games and TV shows, especially among young adolescents.
Statistics from the Entertainment Software Association show that 28% of video game players are under 18 years of age. This shows that vast majority of video game players are adults.
Many disgruntled parents claim video games should be subject to a higher degree of censorship and argue that these games are too violent for kids, but these games are not necessarily targeted towards kids, and there is no conclusive evidence that regularly viewing violence in the media can negatively affect them.
Therefore, censorship of the media should not be harshly enforced, although there are many people who believe censorship should be better for adolescents.
The levels of violence included in a video game or TV show should be at the discretion of the creators in the media.
In America, we have freedom of speech. The media is not regulated, so people are free to express themselves. Therefore, if media producers feel their media, whether that be TV shows or video games, etc., needs violence or gore, they are able to include that as they feel needed.
Violent scenes in a TV show can add to the weight of the scene or give it shock value. This can provoke a certain response in viewers that could not be obtained without a certain degree of gore.
It also can help to typify a character in a given show, such as in the case of Negan on The Walking Dead. Negan is portrayed as a villain from his start on the show, but when he violently and mercilessly kills 2 of the main characters, Abraham and Glenn, his actions characterize him as a truly cruel character, and augments the viewer's hatred of him.
The extreme level of gore in Glenn's death serves to further add emotion and pain in both the other characters and the viewers of the show. This enables the audience to better sympathize with the characters, as the audience sees exactly what the characters would see, the brutal, uncensored death of their friends.
According to The Insider, The Walking Dead is currently the most popular show on air, and it contains many scenes of violence like this one. It is obvious to see how popular violence is in the media, since the top 3 most popular shows are The Walking Dead, as said above, along with Vikings and Game of Thrones.
Vikings is a TV series inspired by the tales of the Norsemen of early medieval Scandinavia. It follows the legendary Viking chieftain Ragnar Lothbrok and his crew, family, and descendants. Through the show, Ragnar builds a fleet of boats to make it to the Western world, while he battles for supremacy and land.
Game of Thrones is a show set in a fantasy world about 2 families and their power struggle with each other. It is well known for its high level of deaths, sexual content, and gore.
Clearly, this type of media is what the general public wants to watch, considering their large audience of millions. So a higher degree of censorship in violent TV shows would go against the desires of the populace.
These popular shows utilize violence as a storytelling tool to shape their characters and also their settings. The war and violence on Vikings helps characterize the time period and society it is set in.
However, in some cases, there has been controversy over whether the violence in a form of media is too extreme and serves no purpose to the story, and in these cases, people argue that the scene should be removed.
The game, Grand Theft Auto V, is one that is shrouded in controversy, but it is the 3rd best-selling video game of all time, and is widely regarded as one of the most financially successful pieces of entertainment of all time.
Clearly, its content resonates with audiences and it is extremely popular. It caters to the desires of the people. However, a department store chain in Australia ended up pulling the game from its shelves following a petition against its controversial, violent scenes.
Its most controversial scene is one in which one of the main characters, a gamer can play as, Trevor, violently tortures a man. The torture scene is shown very graphically, and players can choose between multiple tools to torture the man with, such as a wrench and pliers.
Many people argue that this scene was in bad taste of the game's creators, and it should be removed. It certainly characterizes Trevor in an extreme way, seeing the pleasure he takes in torturing this man.
Aren't you a lucky boy? No, 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 no!
It can be argued that this scene was necessary to the storyline. It definitely portrays Trevor as a psychotic man with a disregard for human life, which he certainly is.
The character of Trevor is widely regarded as one of the most well-developed video game characters of all time, and the creators actually won a number of awards for the character of Trevor, including the Cody Award for Best Male Character.
Overall, the scene may or may not have been necessary for the storyline or the development of Trevor as a character. Either side can be argued, and it is undoubtedly a brutal scene both to watch and play.
But ultimately, the decision of whether to include a scene like this in a piece of media is up to the creator. Violence is a tool that they should be allowed to use if they choose to do so.
Violence is also utilized in comedy shows for humor, even in shows targeted towards children like SpongeBob. Violence plays a key part in television, even in shows for younger viewers that exist on a less serious platform than that of a show like Game of Thrones.
The proliferation of violence through media, starting at the shows people are watching as kids, up through the shows they're watching as adults, is a cause for concern for some people. This leads to a greater push for censorship of violence.
An argument for censorship that comes particularly from parents is that violent media and video games can have a negative effect on their kids and cause them to become more aggressive. There are some psychologists who back up these claims with their studies.
And we're putting our kids for fun in front of essentially killing simulators. Where are we going with that? We have to really recognize the fact that there are changes in their minds and their thinking and their behavior that are going to come of that. If there weren't changes from media, from entertainment, we wouldn't do it.
Dr. Romeo Vitelli, a child psychologist who writes for Psychology Today, explains the various problems with the studies that allege a connection between violent media and violent behavior. One of the main issues is that there are inconsistencies as to how aggression is actually measured. It is near impossible to quantitatively measure aggression.
Since there are no commonly accepted tests of aggression, researchers often use laboratory measures that may not be valid or reliable enough to test the link between media violence and aggressive behavior.
Another criticism of these studies is the high occurrence of publication bias in this subject. Usually, studies with positive results get published in professional journals, while negative findings often go unpublished. Many researchers tend to ignore studies that disprove their own research, which could slant their own conclusions over whether a link exists. Here, Dr. Stanton Seminow talks about his claims on the real effects of violence.
It is true that for people who commit acts of violence, they're drawn to violence, they're fascinated by violence. But to say that watching violence made them that way is a complete and total stretch.
Some of the more credible arguments regarding the negative effects that violent video games may have is the reward systems in video games. These systems are a type of behavioral script, which is a psychology term meaning the way by which a person learns a behavior.
The rewards in these systems in first-person shooter games are essentially points and awards the player can earn when they kill a certain amount of people or kill more effectively.
This system then makes players want to do well in the game and therefore keep playing the game, overall increasing the popularity of the game.
First-person shooter games like Call of Duty World War II have a system where you receive points for each kill you make, as shown in this gameplay clip.
In Call of Duty, players can even receive certain rewards like double kill if you kill 2 players in quick succession, and payback if you kill a player who recently killed you.
If players are on a kill streak, where they keep increasing their kill count without dying, they can receive rewards from the game, such as a recon aircraft and a mortar strike, as shown in this video.
Certain psychologists argue that this system, which rewards violence and murder, will have a negative effect on impressionable young adolescents, teaching them that aggression is a positive form of behavior that will be rewarded.
However, a study done at the University of Virginia shows that from a young age, children have the ability to distinguish fact from fiction, meaning they can distinguish the difference between playing a first-person shooter game and reality. Jacqueline Woolley, a professor and researcher from the University of Virginia, conducted a research study with over 400 children, testing their ability to distinguish fantasy from reality.
She concluded from the study that as early as ages 3 to 5, children can understand this concept. Woolley said, "It is clear from the studies that young children do not believe everything they hear, and that they can use the context surrounding the presentation of a new entity to make inferences about the real versus fantastical nature of that entity."
One aspect of the study was using made-up words in different contexts and then asking the children if they believed the word was real. They were far more likely to believe it as a real word if it was presented to them in a real-world context, such as in a sentence about a doctor, than if it was presented to them in a fantasy context, such as in a sentence about a fairy.
If children as young as 5 can take in information with regard to its context, it's clear that adolescents are able to understand that although a video game will reward players for violent actions such as murder, in real life, violent and aggressive behavior is not rewarded. For the most part, adolescents understand that video games are fantasy, and the information presented in it cannot be applied to real life.
The bottom line is, if a child has a predisposition to violence or anger issues, a high level of intake of violent media can cause them to be more aggressive. At this point, it is at the discretion of the parents to decide whether or not to let their child watch violent forms of media.
For the average child, violent media has no long-term effects and only minimal short-term effects. Censorship based on the accusations that violent media can negatively affect children is irrational and unfounded.
It can even be argued that censorship itself can have a negative effect on children. This concept was shown in a dramatized manner in the popular Netflix series Black Mirror.
Black Mirror is a sci-fi TV series consisting of suspenseful, action-packed standalone episodes, each consisting of a different cast. One episode in the series is titled Archangel.
In this episode, a mother censors not only what her daughter Sarah can watch, but what her daughter can see and do in her everyday life, through a chip she gets installed in her daughter's brain.
Throughout the episode, it is shown that the censorship of Sarah's life has a negative effect on her. She develops a fascination with the vulgar imagery she's prevented from seeing. When she is no longer subjected to the censorship, she seeks out extreme violence and sexuality.
So this one's got a hacksaw, and he's got to cut his own foot off. So the terrorist guy, okay, keep an eye on the knife. See? He's gonna take his whole head off.
It is clear that the censorship and overprotective parenting from her mother leads her to harbor resentment towards her.
Sarah, shut up!
Although this is clearly a dramatized case for TV, this could be used as an example of how censorship could affect our society, and it can be applied in reality to a degree. And so, when parents are gauging the degree of censorship they should place on the media their child is subjected to, they have to take into account both the fact that violence and vulgarity is prevalent in our society and will eventually become easily available to them, along with the very real possibility that too much control over their child could lead to resentment.
Because ultimately, it should be the parent's choice what their child views. It is a choice of the creators to put violence and sexual content in their media, and that should not be restricted. If a parent doesn't want their child seeing something, they can simply choose not to allow them to watch it.
So, okay, the Attorney General says there's too much violence on TV, and that should stop. But even if you took out all the violent shows, you could still see the news. And so until mankind is peaceful enough not to have violence on the news, there's no point in taking out of shows that need it for entertainment value. Thank you.